Very good evening, and this is Gary. I'll be your instructor for today, and we will be talking about what Angular 2 training is all about in Edureka. We'll quickly look at a demonstration of Angular codes as well to look at what Angular can give you in terms of an application development and what a particular Angular application would look like. Apart from that, we would also have a good shy on Firebase, which can be used along with Angular as an alternative for database or data store. And we'll quickly go ahead and look at that particular aspect during the demonstration of Angular 2. We will not be doing any kind of coding, but I'll definitely touch upon and explain most of the scenarios that Angular uses, and you would be able to catch up on that particular section with the pre-developed codes. So let's get started for the day today. And like I said, the agenda of today's session is going to be, we will be looking at why Angular, what companies are using Angular already, what is the job trends that are associated with Angular 2. We'll quickly look at the demo web application like we discussed about. We'll look at the building blocks of an Angular application, and we will also look at them separately. All right, so let's look at the companies which are using AngularJS as well as Angular. The companies that are using Angular are Netflix, Guardian, YouTube, Weather Channel, PayPal, Freelancer. DoubleClick is also one of them, Google DoubleClick. Let's look at Angular 2 job trends right now. Angular 2 got released in 2016. Edureka is one of the organizations which have been doing the trainings for Angular 2 since the beta version, and we looked at Angular 2 job trends since 2016, and it has been on the growth exponentially. So technically at this particular point of time, it's just picking up, and this is the right time to get into the Angular 2 bandwagon. So let's quickly look at a very simple sample application where we will be using most of the components and most of the features of Angular 2 into that particular application, and we'll look at how this particular application has been coded. The project is top 250 movies to watch. So what this particular project is going to do is it is going to allow you to log in through Google and provide a list of movies in this particular application. The data is stored in Firebase, and we will be fetching that from a cloud database. And that's what this particular project is all about. You will be able to look at the list. You will be able to look at the details of each of the movies, top 250 movies that you might really want to watch. Great. So what is Angular in the first place? Well, for people who have already had a hands-on or they have got their hands dirty with AngularJS, it's a single page application, as you all know. For people who do not know what is Angular, Angular is a client-side JavaScript framework to create single page applications. When I say single page applications, I really mean single page applications, and everything that you do or every functionality of the application is going to be in one single index.html. Any kind of change of pages also happens within that particular HTML page, which means that we are trying to manage states or pseudo states in your client application. Do not go to the server again and again and again for change of page or change of HTML views or change of any kind of static CSS that you require for a different page. Everything is loaded in one go. Having said that, Angular 2 is going to supersede or succeed AngularJS 1.x version, and Angular 2 is completely component heavy, which is based on the concept of web components. It extends static HTML into dynamic HTML using the concept of web components, and this is exactly the base of Angular 2. There were some issues with Angular 1. One was that whenever you were creating controllers, it was scope based, and there were some digest related issues that used to happen, and anything from outside world getting into the Angular world was a little difficult, and you would technically do something like $scope.$digest or $scope.$apply to get two-way binding working. Those issues were resolved. Some issues of directives were resolved, and then came year 6. So combining all these rectification of issues and coming up with new versions of JavaScript, Angular 2 took advantage of all of these and came up with a framework that is ES6 based, or you can also go ahead code in TypeScript, which is a superset of JavaScript, and create applications with Angular 2. Having said that, building blocks of Angular 2, let's have a look at that. There are quite a few building blocks of Angular 2. At this particular point of time, we are focusing on components, directives, services, as well as routers, because that's what we have used in our application. There is one more small thing that is called as pipes. We have not used a lot of pipes in this particular section, but definitely that also is one of the building blocks. So what are components? Like I said, Angular 2 is component heavy. What is a component? Well, something like a div, something like a tag, something like an anchor tag, something like an table tag, everything is HTML tags or HTML components. Angular says there is a particular library or a functionality within JavaScript to create your own components. Why not make use of that? Why not create your HTML or make your HTML dynamic using components, which would have its own functionality, and you can use that particular functionality to go ahead create your application. So that's exactly the concept that's being exploited to create scalable applications which are enterprise level and which are performant. Remember, at this particular point of time, very important differentiation that you might really want to make is performant code is not equal to load speed or speed of the application. Performant code is something that's related to performance and scalability of the application over enterprise applications, on enterprise applications, in enterprise applications, for huge applications, so that it does not deteriorate when your application size grows. So that's a very important differentiation that you might want to remember. A huge JS file does not really mean that it's a non-performant code. A huge JS file just means that it's a huge application. The load speed might be slower because of the huge application size, but definitely it does not mean that it's not performant. Once the page loads, whatever is the performance or the speed is what is actually going to be your performance. And there are various viewpoints with respect to performance, and that is something that is really nice about Angular, that it takes all these considerations of enterprise performance into your component-based framework of Angular 2. Great. So what is a component? Well, a component is simple tag that you create on your own. And this particular building block controls patch of screen called a view. The patch of screen might be a small section. It might be a complete application, or it might be a component tree within that particular application. What I really mean by that is everything that you are going to create are going to be components. Body, you would create your own email headers, you would create your own email tag and work across with that. So that's exactly what we are going to do. Directives help you with DOM manipulation along with pipes which help you with data formatting in the DOM. Services is something that encompasses any value, function, feature, anything that you want to share across components, because components are going to be isolated. That's the concept. And isolated components cannot share data between each other or between component trees. Because of that, services come in very handy. You can adhere to a lot of patterns like singleton pattern, service patterns, or like factory pattern, and work across with that. Angular has used most of the pattern very intelligently to create an application that is scalable. And remember, even if you create a factory pattern, you can still go ahead create the factory as a singleton. So, that option also is available. I said we are converting static HTML into dynamic HTML or managing states. And we do not go to the server for static files. We do not go to the server for change of page. What is it that takes care of this? And that's exactly what client routers do, or Angular routers do. Angular routers tell that this particular application is going to change the page or going to change the state in client side, and will make use of the client memory, will make use of the client system to manage your application efficiently. So any change of presentation view, any change of presentation state, or the view state is going to be managed by the client-side router, which is part of your client-side application. So let's quickly look at each of them in some detail. Components, a very, very important aspect and building block of Angular application. All right, so if you have a page and your whole page is one component, say for example, Edureka is one component, you might have multiple chunks of custom components inside it with navigation bar doing the navigation. And that is a component. Sidebar being a component by itself, providing the functionality of sidebar menus or any kind of sidebar related view. The courses or your movies section is going to have your movies list or courses list or whatever that particular page is going to show. In this case, it is going to be courses because we are using Edureka as our basic application, and it is going to show a list of courses. But remember, this particular list of courses might be an application by itself, which means that it might have its own functionality. So you might have some functionalities which are created within courses, which might also include your custom tags, which might not include your custom tags. Completely depends on what you're going to go ahead to. So in Angular web applications, all the view functionalities are implemented as separate components, and these separate components may be components, only single components, individual components by themselves, or they may be a component tree where components are using HTML tags or your custom created components within them, and you are working across with them for your functionalities. So both options are possible. Great. So we talked about components. What is happening in an Angular application is you might have a home link, which might be one route or one page, movies list, which might be one route or one page. Each of these are attached to a component or a component tree. And since they are attached to a component or a component tree, you would be able to get access to that particular state of page directly from within the application. Home component would show the home page view of the application. Movies will show the top list of movies. The about component is going to show the details of Edureka. That's also going to be a state. And your nav bar is also going to be a component which uses these home component or about component or movies component or associates to these components using a router. So that is going to be the structure of your application. Now that we have said that, the components that are used within the section will or might have component trees, like I said. Example, the whole application is one component which uses the movies list or the movies component, and this particular movies component is now using movies detail component. So it basically creates a tree like a DOM tree. You have a div, span, anchor, link, something like that. So it becomes a node list or it becomes component tree as we call. And this is exactly what has been extracted into our application as well. We are also creating the components partials in separate components because it is more maintainable. That's the best part of it. And apart from maintainability, you know what? You can actually now go ahead, have two people working, one person working on the list and one person working on the details, and you can technically go ahead to parallel development. Parallel development in UI is absolutely very difficult. Trust me on that, because I have done a lot of code. It is the most abused section in an application. Parallel development and UI can be the most daunting task, and the code or the HTML that one person writes can be really so messy with a lot of HTML tags, a lot of structures of HTML, that it really becomes difficult for a new person to come and understand what is going on. And that's exactly what components does to your application. It makes your HTML pages a lot readable, a lot maintainable, and it breaks your application into smaller chunks, each of the chunk referring to a component, and the component having a smaller chunk of HTML which can be maintained, tested, as well as developed parallelly. So that is something that is really very nice about most of these single page frameworks, current single page frameworks which use components based application development. So let's look at the component in a closer detail. The movies component, if you look at it, it's actually coded in TypeScript and it uses types. But to be very frank, there is not a lot of difference between the present day JavaScript as well as TypeScript. Some features here and there would be different, which is futuristic in case of TypeScript. Apart from that, it also provides something called as types. Remember, JavaScript is dynamically typed and is not statically typed, or it is typed during runtime. And because of that, there are a few problems that arise during application development, especially in enterprise application development. And that's exactly what TypeScript tries to resolve. It helps you create application with static types, and that's one of the reasons for it being adopted so much in the market right now. It helps you go ahead, create application with types that will be able to tell you what are the errors of your objects that persist in your application, and will force you to resolve them when you go ahead, compile this particular TypeScript file into a JavaScript file. Remember again, if I remove types out of this particular code base that I'm showing you, it might technically be ES6 or ES7 code. And frankly, that's exactly what JavaScript is moving to. And if you notice, this is single module. This particular movies component is a single module, which is forcing JavaScript to import objects to be used inside and forcing JavaScript to export objects to be used from a different file, which means that if you want to use the file core, any object within that, if you want to use it, you will basically have to import it from that particular JavaScript file, use it inside, and if there is something that you want to use from outside which you have declared here within this particular JavaScript file, you technically have to export it. That's the whole concept of import and export here. And in this particular section, there is an annotation, which is the one that defines how your component is going to be used in your HTML pages. And that's exactly what we are seeing with the @component annotation, which takes the metadata as an object of key value pairs. It has selector, which is the name of the component or the tag name. So you would be using the tag app-movies in your HTML pages. Template URL provides the DOM. Style URLs provides the isolated styles for this particular component. Remember, component is pseudo isolated or completely isolated depending on whether you're using an emulated component creation or a shadow DOM component creation. Apart from that, this particular section is triggering of a Firebase service to get movie lists as well as search movies from your list. At this particular point of time, we are not implementing the search movies. We are just going ahead doing a console.log, but we are definitely assigning the returned value of Firebase results and assigning that to a variable called as movies, which is the one we are going to go ahead repeat in the DOM recursively so that it is shown in the DOM. So let's quickly look at what are the sections here. So @component is the annotation which uses metadata to specify what the component does. Template URL provides the HTML templates, and style URLs provide the HTML and CSS which is isolated for this particular component, which means that when you go ahead use app-movies in your HTML page, you would technically have something like movies.component.html partial pushed into your DOM with its own CSS of component.css. That's what is going to happen here. And if you notice, the component class is the one that provides the functionality, or the static functionality is converted to dynamic functionality using this particular class, JavaScript class that is there. Great. The second building block is the directives. Like we discussed before, directives are nothing but sets of functionalities that can be used in the DOM to manipulate or provide any kind of functionality to the DOM. The difference between directive and a component is very simple. Component has a view or an HTML template or a partial, but directives do not. Simple. Components are directives with a template. That's the basic difference. If you understand this particular concept, you would understand that directives are basically classes with sets of functionalities. When applied to the DOM, will provide that functionality wherever it is applied to. So if you have a directive which is applied to a tag like maybe div, that functionality will be available for the tag div that you have applied. Directives are of many different types. There are two types of categorization. One type of categorization is based on what it does. So basically you can have a directive which changes the structure of the DOM or makes alterations to the structure of the DOM or node list, and those directives are called structural directives. Non-structural directives or simple directives are those which just provide some functionality which does not really change the structure of the DOM. The third kind of directives are basically components which basically have a template. Yes, that's the difference. The second categorization is basically based on where it is used. Based on where it is used, you can use it as an attribute, you can use it as a class, or you can use it as an element. Which means that you can create a directive which looks like an element or used like an element. You can create a directive which looks like an attribute or your property of an HTML tag. And you can also use it as a class which is defined within the class attribute of the HTML tag. So wherever this particular directive is present, Angular is going to recognize that it's a directive and is going to push that particular functionality as soon as it finds that directive is there in that specific area. Great. So again, component directives with the template, structural directives which change the structure of the DOM, attributes or simple directives which does not change the appearance of the DOM but provides a behavior to an element or behavior to the DOM section. So let's look at what are structural directives. Let's have a closer look at structural directives here. So what have we done in that component, in the movies component? We have got a list of movies from Firebase, right? A get request. That get request is assigning data to your movies variable. Now what we are doing with that movies variable is very simple, very interesting, is that we are going to use something called as ng-for directive, which is an attribute directive which goes ahead and changes the DOM structure. It is going to repeat the li tag the number of times the movies array or movies.length is valid. So if movies, it's a list of 250 movies, it is going to repeat li 250 times. If it's 10 movies, it is going to repeat the li 10 times. And that's exactly what ng-for does. And it's a very, very typical example of a structural directive and an attribute directive. Why two? Because we have two types of categorization, right? That's the reason. You will also notice that there are some directives which do not change the structure. Example, router link is one such directive. It just provides you with the functionality, and the functionality that it provides is it's an alternate for href. So whatever href does, something more than that is taken or created by Angular, and it provides a router link. Router link is similar to href. It provides you going from one particular page to another, but it is more scalable. It has a lot of features that your anchor tag does not have. So it's a replacement, a drop-in replacement for your href link attribute tag. App bold text is something similar. Wherever you apply app bold text, it just takes that particular node list, and whatever text is there within that will become bold. That's exactly what your directive app bold text is doing there. So that's also an example of non-structural directive or an simple directive there. So it's app bold and router link is non-structural directive. But in case of ng-for, it's a structural directive. All right, great. So that was about directives. We will look at app bold text. We already discussed that, saw that app bold text is going to convert that into bold as soon as we go ahead and hover it on the link there. So what are services? Services are nothing but objects that can be pushed or injected into your components to share data, to share some functionality, or go ahead, use some particular variables that might be used as configuration when your application is working. The use cases are different, but definitely it is something which is really nice. They are injectables, they are singletons in case of Angular, but you can move away from a singleton pattern and create multiple objects of the same service. So that is possible. So service is a very broad category that encompasses any value, function, feature, configuration, anything that you think of. It acts as a data store. It acts as a store for functions like business logic, presentation logic, logging, which are common to a lot of directives, services, components, and they can be injected into each of them using the dependency injection process. So let's have a closer look at services. So services are, like I said, injectables, which means that you can inject or provide a dependency injection as an argument to a component class or a directive class, or for that matter, injectables themselves, because classes have constructors. So the moment we are injecting Angular Fire into the injectable, we are pushing the dependency or injecting the dependency so that that particular Angular Fire can be used within your injectable or your component, or for that matter, your directives. If you notice, it's also created in a similar manner. It uses an injectable annotation, but at this particular point of time, we are not using any metadata. It also has a class which is exported. At this particular point of time, we have not shown the imports, but you also have to import injectable from the core so that this can be created. We are assuming that you understand that particular part. There are two functions here that are used commonly, and that is get movies and get movie details. This is how the get movies and get movie details have been implemented, and these have been injected into the component to trigger off the request and get the data from there. It's also also using something called as an observable, which provides reactive patterns to Angular, which works as an asynchronous operation, and also provides the power of manipulating those operations like an array. Apart from that, you can also schedule an observable. You can work across with observable over a period, over time. And because of that, you also have a lot of flexibility in how you manage your observable. Very important differentiation between a promise and an observable is that promise is just async and can be subscribed to by one particular person or one particular place. In case of observables, it has the power of events, so which means that the moment you create an observable, there are a lot of places or a lot of subscribers that can listen to those events, and they can do some particular function at a single instance of an event. So that is the advantage. So you have power of events coming in with observables. I have a quick question coming in. What do you mean when you say services are singleton? Well, I would not say services are singletons. I would say services can be singleton as well as non-singleton. What do I mean by that? Singleton is nothing but a particular object, in case of JavaScript, created once, and that same object is used, or that same object reference is used by others as you're not going to create multiple copies of objects. There'll be only one object, a single object, that are used as dependencies by a lot of places. So if you make a change in that particular object, that particular change will be reflected across all the components, across all the directives, across all the pipes where you go ahead use that particular object. So that's the reason services can be singletons. In Angular, they are singleton, and the difference between a service and a factory is that factory returns a value, service uses an instantiation or a this instance. So it's basically an instance, and factory is basically a return value. That's the differentiation, or that's how the key terms are described. Does that answer your question? Okay, great, fantastic. So let's quickly go ahead and look at what is dependency injection. Dependency injection is nothing but pushing of dependencies into the dependents as arguments and trying to maintain a particular pattern where the dependencies are created if they are not there, and if they are already there, they'll be resolved and injected. So whenever you do push a dependency as an argument into the constructor, the dependency injection library within Angular is going to check whether the object is there. If the object is there, it is going to resolve it. If it's not there, it will create and then resolve it to maintain the singleton pattern. It is always beneficial to use singleton pattern, but remember, don't go by it as a thumb rule. Most of the cases it holds true, but there are scenarios like configuration or startup configuration details where you might really want to create new objects on the fly and move away from singleton pattern. So there is one use case where you might want to go away from singleton patterns, and Angular provides an option to create objects on the fly by yourself so that you can move away from that particular pattern. So Angular takes care of that. In case of Angular 1.x, that was not an option there. Great. So dependency injection creates a new instance of the class along when it's required. So when it's required, it creates a new instance. And if it is there, it resolves it. It's used to provide services to a component, directive, pipe, or services as per their need. So it is just in time. The process of providing a service to the component is called dependency injection, or in other words, the process of injecting the dependency into the dependent using the dependency injection process is called dependency injection. Dependency injection process is managed by a part of the library in Angular framework called as dependency injection, and there is a separate set of code base within Angular that takes care of this. Great. So let's look at a dependency injection example. Firebase was one dependency injection example which we already discussed. So what is a router? Well, I said you don't go to the server to change the page, right? So how do you change the page? Using a client-side router. And that's exactly what router does. Router maps your links or the URL to a component view. Simple. Router maps your URL to the component view, and it tries to manage states or pseudo states for a client application, client website, web application. So a router allows you to navigate across components in your web application, or it allows you to navigate across your different view or different states of the application. Each of these states will compulsorily be a component view, and they do different things based on what the component definition is and what the functionality of that particular component is. And components are compulsorily associated with your routes. You cannot associate directives, nor you can associate pipes, because they really don't have any template there. They don't have a view, so you cannot do that. So let's look at routers at a closer view rather than a high level view. Like I said, routes are basically associated to components. So you have a URL associated to a component. You can also create child routes, but that is out of scope in this particular section. You will be able to go ahead, provide dynamic params like :ID you see in movie-details. So that particular option is available. You can also pass query params along with your path params. And in your ng module, you have to declare the router as a module and then use that particular module in your application module so that routes are available to your Angular application. So basically you have an Angular application module, you have a route module, and you're importing the route module within your Angular application so that it is used. That's how it works. Great. And the router link is the one that helps you navigate from a particular component to a component. That's exactly what router link does. Apart from providing that, it also helps you concatenate strings as well as variables, JavaScript variables, and that's one of the best part of your router link. Router outlet is nothing but a placeholder where your component views associated to routes will come and sit. It's a placeholder, simple. It's a placeholder. So if you click on home, it will associate to home component, which will come and sit instead of router outlet. If you go to about component will come and sit instead of router outlet. So it's a placeholder where your components are going to come and be shown there. Something similar to ng view in case of one.txt for people who have done one.txt. Great. So if you are in the home page and you click on the movies list, it will come and show the movies list. So these are the different views how it is going to be shown. So let's quickly look at the demo here for our application. The application movies list is a very simple application that will be seen something like this. How do I start that? We'll also have a look at that. The application, when clicked, will allow me to log in using my Google credentials. And the moment it checks that, it will show me logged in, and I can look at the movies list now, and it shows a list of all the movies. There will be 250 movies out here. If I click on Godfather, it is going to show the details of that particular movie. Let's quickly go ahead and look at a different section. So it shows the detail based on the ID of that particular movie. If I go to the home section, it will show login with Google, but it really does not matter because we are already logged in, and this is the home section. Let's quickly look at what is the code that we have used for this simple application. It is really simple. I have used Angular CLI to create a project structure, and the project structure would technically look like this, which will have karma conf, which will help unit testing, protractor conf, which will help me use the application with test-driven development and will be used for end-to-end testing. tsconfig will be used for compiling your TypeScript files to JavaScript, and tslint is going to provide you with the IntelliSense for your tools. So these are two links that are pushed around for your application development, and two links can really make a difference between a novice developer and a experienced developer. I believe that a person who knows his tools better might be a better coder than a person who doesn't know his tools or her tools. So it is absolutely important that you have better tooling when you're doing application development. And most of the years in history, JavaScript tooling, HTML tooling were never really so scalable that it could have been used at an enterprise level in a true sense. I'm not against other tools which were there before, but the only thing is application development tooling was a little messy, even with a lot of good tools being around. So the application is going to reside in our app, and we don't have a server because we are using the cloud to run this particular application. The only thing that we are running at this particular point of time is a local development environment instead of a server, so that we are able to start the application. This needs a server environment to start. That's the reason I've started this particular server. How did I start the server? I simply went ahead and typed ng-serve. The moment I typed ng-serve, it is going to go ahead, compile my application, create a distribution, and run that distribution in a development server. You can also build this application and push it into deployment server, and it should work exactly the same like it is working right now. Let it start. Meanwhile, we'll go ahead and look at the application structure. The application structure resides within the app, and there is an index.html which basically has a bootstrap file and nothing else. Nothing else, because everything else is pushed by ng CLI or Angular CLI. But remember, my bootstrap of the application is actually happening from this particular main.ts, which bootstraps my app module, and polyfills are the different polyfills that are needed for my application. And this is also injected during the build process into the index.html. So environment is for production or development. Assets will have all the assets of images and all, everything is going to be here. Your folder structure for your application looks something like this. Components will have all the defined components. Your interfaces will have all the defined types. Your services will have all the defined services. Home component is the main one. The second one that is going to be the main is your app module, which is the module of your Angular. This is the root module, which is the one that uses a service, which is the one that also uses the router, which is the one that also goes ahead and creates the routes. So routes are used within that, and it is used as a module. So router module will help you create router module for your application module. So what is this doing? It is importing all the files of components and declaring it in your declarations. You have to compulsorily declare all the things that you are using within your application, otherwise you'll be thrown off. If your component has to be available within your application, it has to be declared here. If your pipes and directives are to be used within your application, it has to be declared here. There are some common sets of functionalities like directives, pipes, HTTP services, which are available from these, which have been imported and used. Browser module provides you with native browser support for that particular operating system. Great. So having said that, this is the one that creates the application module. It instantiates a component called as app root, which is the root component which has the entire application inside. So this is the goal that we are working on, and that is exactly what app component does. It creates app root, and that is exactly what is used in our HTML page. And this indirectly uses, if you notice, other components. So it's creating a component tree, but knowingly or unknowingly, if you notice, this code is actually more readable, and that's exactly the goal of Angular. It makes your code a lot readable, maintainable, testable, independent, so that it can be developed in parallel and can be maintained much better. So let's look at the other ones, components that have been created. Home component is a very simple component. It just allows the login. It triggers off the login one with the function that we are using in the service. So let's look at the service first so that we can look at the components right. So this particular service has functions of get movies, get movie details, search, as well as a different injector called as Angular Fire, which is a dependency which I have included in our package.json or my node module. And if you notice, my Angular Fire is the one that is being used for that. So great. So we have used this. What are the different types we are using? We are only using one type, and we are using it recursively and very sensibly. Once we have done this, we are going to the component, and the component home is going to have a template where it is showing only this particular section. This particular section is the simple thing that is shown in the home page. About page is going to show the about section about Edureka. Let's quickly click on about section. So it is going to show Edureka details here. In case of movie list, I am going to show you the movie component, and the movie component just gets the movies and assigns it to this dot movies, and in the template it is basically repeating it. So did you notice that this particular DOM element structure has actually become very simple? And that's exactly what Angular tries to do. It makes it a lot easier to be maintained. And when we actually move towards reusable components, it becomes even more better. What I mean by reusable components is that you can create components that can be used at a lot of places. So say, for example, a table which is searchable, can be created as a reusable component, can be used at a lot of places like searching number of users, searching a list of movies, and so on and so forth. So that particular use case can also be done. In case of the movie details, it has an ng on it, which basically gets the ID from the route, and it goes ahead, triggers an HTTP request, gets the movie details and assigns it to the movie, which is then printed out in your component HTML page. And your component HTML page has one particular section to go back, and that's about it. And it prints everything else which comes from your Firebase database. So this is how the application is divided and split. And if you notice, the component that we create have actually eased the templating process, or ease the way in which we work across with the DOM. And you can actually work with this in such a way that one person is taking care of movie details, one person is taking care of movies, one person is taking care of home, and so on and so forth. So that definitely makes it a lot more maintainable, testable as well, because these components are going to be isolated and independent, so you can run tests separately on them. The tests would look something like this, where you have to create a test bed and then go ahead, create your own tests. Angular CLI helps you with most of these. We will be talking about these a lot more in detail in our sessions in Angular 2 with Edureka. I invite all of you to go ahead, get logged in. There are some other videos of introduction with Angular 2 in our playlist. You can also have a look at that. It will get you started with Angular 2 quite much. But definitely, I invite you to join our sessions for Angular 2, and I hope to see you there. Thank you very much for your patience. In case you want the code, you can contact the support team at support@edureka.co. And in case you want to register for these courses, you can contact the sales team at sales@edureka.co. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. I hope to see you in one of the sessions.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply to them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to our Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!